to our damaged institutions. Please teach us to look beyond our present situation and to think, act, and build for the next generation, which by ancient definition is the meaning of heroism. Temper our decisions and actions with humility, compassion, and understanding, that we may give justice to every man, protecting life, liberty, property, and above all, the reputation and honor of all we hold dear, our country, our families, loved ones, and our most precious children. All this we implore in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Senator Hanasan. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Hunasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soveri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 23 senators, with correction, Senator Pacquiao is here. With 24 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President, I move to defer the approval of the journal of the 32nd session Tuesday as at a later hour as it is still being prepared, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved. Secretary.
Bills on first reading. 1198, an act amending Republic Act number 8282 entitled An Act Further Strengthening the Social Security System, thereby amending for this purpose Republic Act number 1161 as amended, otherwise known as the Local Security Law, and for other purposes by Senator Richard Gordon.
Referred to the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises and Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
1199, an act abolishing the imposition of irrigation service fees and such other related fees, amending for the purpose certain sections of Republic Act number 3601, Presidential Decree number 552, and Presidential Decree number 1702 by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
1200, an act designating Philippine performing arts companies, defining their roles and functions as such, and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Resolution 194, congratulating and commending the Honorable Juan Miguel F. Soveri for being conferred with the Presidential Award from the University of the Philippines Los Baños Alumni Association by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Rules.
Communications, letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act number 7653, the New Central Bank Act, circular letter numbers CL-2016-078, 079, and 080 dated 22 and 23 September 2016, and memorandum number M-2016-013 dated 27 September 2016.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'd like to acknowledge some visitors in the Senate. We have the Manila Christian Day School of Santa Mesa, Manila, and grade 11 students from St. Scholastica's Academy, Marikina, headed by Len Ferrer and ID Resurrection. Also, Mr. President, provincial officials of Lanao del Sur, Office of the Governor, headed by Director Ms. Jenny Tamano and Provincial Architect Yasser Adyong. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to the Senate, to all of our guests.
Mr. President, I move to recognize Senator Loren Legarda to speak on a matter of public interest.
Before I recognize Senator Ligarda, can I request for a little silence in the entire premises? Okay. So Senator Ligarda is recognized to speak on a matter of public interest.
Sandali. 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, suspension, session is suspended. Bakit? Problema? The session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Ligarda has the floor.
Mr. President, tomorrow, October 13, we will commemorate the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, or the IDDR. I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege to highlight once again the need to build our community's resilience to disaster and climate risks. When Nenita Consolacion saw her 2 children in the rubble, they were lifeless But what struck her most was the sight of her beloved children still holding hands until the end. In between sobs, she narrated how she lost her children when on that fateful day of November 8, 2013, the wind suddenly grew strong, water entered their house, at first ankle deep, then quickly rising, and the next thing she knew, her two children were drowned by the rising floodwaters. Nanita lived to painfully tell her story, but more than 6,000 others are now just part of the statistics. They were not fortunate enough to survive Super Typhoon Yolanda, said to be the world's strongest typhoon to make landfall. Mr. President, this year's IDDR celebration carries the slogan, Live to Tell, and focuses on reducing global disaster mortality, the first of the 7 targets of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. If only communities on the path of Yolanda were prepared, if only they were evacuated in safe areas ahead of time, if only people knew what a storm surge meant and how they could have escaped its wrath, more people could have survived and testified how disaster risk reduction and preparedness can save lives. There are many more if-onlys and what-ifs, but finger-wagging will not give justice to the dead. We need to turn the lessons of Yolanda and other disasters into urgent climate action to build resilience. All over the world, there are many other Nanitas from tragedies of even greater magnitude, such as a 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that claimed 230,000 lives, the 2008 Cyclone Nargis that claimed 130,000 deaths, that struck Myanmar and cost 138,000 deaths, and the 2010 earthquake in Haiti that killed 223,000 deaths or individuals. The Emergency Events Database of the Center for Research on the Epidemiology of Disasters recorded 7,056 disasters worldwide during the period 1996 to 2015. Natural hazards in the past 20 years killed 1.35 million people, more than half died in earthquakes, and the remaining due to weather and climate-related hazards. In the Philippines, deaths caused by storms alone reached 15,880 during the period 2006 to 2015, significantly higher than the 3,970 storm deaths in the previous decade. The community of nations realized that they must come together and craft a global framework that will serve as guide towards addressing risks and building resilience to disasters. In 2005, governments around the world adopted the YOGO Framework for Action, or the HFA, aimed at substantially reducing disaster losses in lives and in the social, economic, and environmental assets of communities and countries by the year 2015. Among the 5 priority actions of HFA, making disaster risk reduction a policy priority and strengthening institutions has progressed the most. Here in our country, the passage of landmark legislation on disaster and climate risk management, the Climate Change Act of 2009, as amended by the People's Survival Fund of 2012, the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010. These have institutionalized and mainstreamed disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in development policies, plans, and programs, as well as in public funding. However, translating policies into action is a different issue altogether. Even with the HFA, the past decade saw disasters continue to exact a very heavy toll. A staggering 1.5 billion people in the world were affected in various ways, including more than 700,000 killed by disasters. The total economic loss was more than $1.3 trillion. In 2015, at the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, Japan, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction led nations in crafting a new framework that focuses on a more targeted approach to effectively guide nations and communities in managing risks and preventing the creation of new risks. The Sendai framework for DRR outlines 7 global targets to be achieved by 2030. First, substantially reduce global disaster mortality. Second, substantially reduce the number of affected people globally. Third, reduce direct economic loss in relation to global GDP. Substantially reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure and the disruption of basic services. Substantially increase the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. Substantially enhance international cooperation to developing nations, substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk reduction information assessments. In the first year of the Sendai framework, we are asked, what are we doing to implement the first target to reduce mortality? The UNISDR cited as an example the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority's Metro Manila Shake Drill, an annual earthquake drill launched in 2015 that aims to prepare citizens and communities in the event the big one occurs. According to the 2004 Metro Manila Earthquake Impact Reduction Study, or the MAMIRS of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake in Metro Manila may destroy 40,000 of residential buildings, cause 34,000 deaths, injure 114,000 individuals, and the ensuing fires may also result in 18,000 additional fatalities. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, PHIVOLCS, already warned that a West Valley fault is ripe for movement. We just cannot predict when it will happen. Meanwhile, we have been experiencing harsher storms and monsoon rains, stronger episodes of El Nino in the past years due to climate change. In the face of imminent threats and the new norm, we cannot do business as usual. We must invest in disaster risk reduction. It has been estimated that the economic impact of disasters will be reduced by $7 for every $1 spent on DRR. Mr. President, in my capacity as your chairperson of the Committee on Finance, we were able to transform the 2016 budget into one that is climate adaptive and disaster resilient. Under the 2016 GAA, the implementation of programs, projects, and activities should contribute towards preventing the creation of new disaster risks, reducing existing disaster risks, building the resilience of local communities and the nation as a whole, towards achieving the goals under the Sendai framework for DRR, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, adopted last September 2015, and the country's intended nationally determined commitments. We have mainstreamed provisions that ensure that the implementation of government programs would contribute towards building resilience, including on the maintenance and operation of dams, repair and retrofitting of public infrastructure, the resilience of agricultural communities, and the building of evacuation centers in every region of the country. We likewise reiterated the enforcement of our environmental laws to strengthen disaster resilience. We will continue, with your support, to do this in the 2017 national budget. But how do we translate these policies into programs that will actually reduce measurable disaster risks? It is critical that we strengthen our adaptation actions at national and local levels. Examples of these are preparing risk assessment, protecting our ecosystems, improving agricultural methods, managing water resources, building settlements in safe zones, developing early warning systems, instituting better building designs, improving insurance coverage, and developing social safety nets. engaging rural people in decision-making, especially to understand autonomous adaptation and the interplay of informal and formal institutions, plays an important role in strengthening public decision-making. Reducing disaster risk is key to poverty eradication and sustainable development. We need to strengthen local risk governance, enhance the resilience of rural livelihoods, preserve the integrity of our ecosystems, and promote the resilience of culture and indigenous peoples. The Sendai framework for DRR urges us not to manage disasters, but to manage the risks so that natural hazards would not turn into disasters. There are many more Nenitas in the world who were given a second chance to live and tell a painful story that could hopefully touch hearts and enlighten minds about the urgent need to make disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation a priority of government. I hope we could all heed the call for action. Let us all take a proactive role in making the Sendai framework work for us. Let us prove that our nation remains steadfast in its commitment to building a more resilient and sustainable planet. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ligarda. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we refer the, yes, may we recognize Senator Ontiveros?
Mr. President, I'm sorry. No, please, ladies first. Mine is just a manifestation of support.
Majority Leader, who shall I recognize?
Senator Ontiveros, Mr. President.
Senator Ontiveros is
Ladies first,
recognized.
ladies first.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader and the good senator from Bukidnon. Would the good senator from, as Senator Gordon said yesterday, from everywhere, yield to a few questions?
Yes, it would be my pleasure to answer the queries of the good senator from everywhere, too, who has been very supportive and joining me in our budget hearings as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Senator, Mr. President, rather, I picked up my ears when the good senator mentioned not just disaster risk reduction, but another way of wording it, managing the risks from disasters.
Yes.
Because as the good senator, I'm sure is aware, there's also that field within disaster risk reduction of disaster management for health, which according to not just the Sendai strategy, but references such as the World Health Organization, the Health Protection Agency, and the UN International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, is built on the premise that the health of the people is inextricably linked to the health of the environment. So I wonder, Mr. President, what the good senator thinks are a few or is one of the most important links between the health of a population and our capacity to reduce the risks of disaster to us or to enable us to be more resilient and responsive in responding to these disasters.
Definitely, Mr. President, when we speak about reducing risk, that would inextricably and inevitably refer to health hazards as well, because every environment hazard is a health hazard as well. What am I referring to? Something as basic as water, potable water, and sanitation. The non-availability or the absence of these, even during times when there are no natural hazards, no storms, no storm surges, no floods, would be a risk to the health and a risk to the environment. During times of typhoons or habagat, when there is flooding, the proliferation of disease, dengue, cholera, malaria, and all the vector-borne diseases. This happens all the time, and if we don't even clean our surroundings, we are afflicted with all these vector-borne diseases. So, and who are the most vulnerable populations when it comes to these hazards? It's the women and the children. Yung ina ng tahanan na siya pa mismo ang nag-iigib ng tubig para sa kanyang pamilya. Siya ang nag-aaruga sa kanyang mga anak. siya ang naghahanap ng malinis na tubig para magluto para sa kanyang nagugutom na pamilya, pati na ang kanyang asawa. These everyday happenings occur in many places in Metro Manila and in rural areas in the country. Just yesterday, in our Department of Health Finance meeting, it shocks us to learn, Mr. President, that in this day and age, 8% of our population do not have private toilet facilities. In fact, 8 million of our population do open defecation. And so it is part of our advocacy on reducing risk by hopefully funding what is needed by next year, by 2017. So there is no Filipino family that is deprived of a toilet, because it is simply a society that does not recognize the basic human rights. It is an inhumane society to allow 8 million people to openly defecate. This is a big risk, I think, in terms of our sanitation, in terms of living in a healthy community. And so the good lady senator is correct in linking disaster risk reduction with health and environmental safety as well.
Indeed, Mr. President, as the WHO Assistant Director General for Emergencies articulated, the framework is really that health and disaster risk reduction, so health including sanitation, as the good senator gave a specific example of, health and disaster risk reduction are deeply connected, because he said healthy people are resilient people, and resilient people recover more quickly from disasters. Returning, Mr. President, to the major reference to Sendai made by the good senator.
Yes.
Experts stressed during that Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai in 2015 that resilient health systems can reduce underlying vulnerability, protect health facilities and services, and scale up the response to meet the wide-ranging health needs in disasters. So ibig mong sabihin, Mr. President, when our health systems are
If they're in
enabled,
place,
if
yes.
they are in
If they're
place,
capable.
and they have a high capacity,
Correct.
they also deliver better results in terms of our disaster
Yes.
preparedness and response.
You're correct.
Mr.
It
President.
simply means that if our barangay health centers are equipped with the necessary equipment to check the the patients within the community, if our DOH hospitals are equipped with the equipment needed to maintain a healthy population, if we have barangay health workers who are trained what to do during the times of an emergency, if we know how to respond in times of floods, in times of tsunami, in times of storm surge, in times of earthquakes. So having the infrastructure, whether in terms of buildings, big or small, health center in the barangay or a provincial or regional hospital, but also having the personnel who are trained of thinking 10 steps ahead, of not only in responding after the storm has hit, but actually are pre-positioned in the areas which are vulnerable, in areas which are predicted to be hit by strong winds, gusty winds, or typhoons. This is very important. And that is the reason why the NDREAM-C law had changed the previously named Calamity Fund into the NDREAM Fund, where a portion of it is actually used or allowed to be used for the pre-positioning of equipment, personnel, and services, so that it would not only be response-oriented. And this deals a lot with the health sector.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a last question,
There are two sessions going on.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Mr. President. As a last question, at least for this afternoon's interpellation of the privileged speech, and then in closing, I'll just put two further questions on the record for further deliberations. But as a last question for this afternoon, Mr. President, healthcare systems provide core capacities for disaster risk management for health, especially on two major points. It said that countries with well-developed systems are often much more resilient and better prepared for disasters, especially on these two major plans, Mr. President. First, primary health care. Primary health care focuses on basic services to improve health status, which in turn builds communities' resilience and provides the foundation for responding to emergencies. And secondly, community-based actions, such as the ones being described by the good senator. Community-based actions are at the front line of protecting health in emergencies. So I'd just like to seek the wisdom of the good senator, Mr. President, how she believes that a focus on primary health care and on community-based actions both enable the community to better prepare for and better respond to disasters.
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, the presence of a DRR officer in every municipality is so important, and that is already part of the law. Let's even go into the smaller political units. If every barangay would have a DRR officer, if every purok or sitio would have a DRR officer. If you noticed the slide earlier, when I showed the slide of San Francisco Municipality in Camotes Island, they were at the eye of Typhoon Haiyan, but there was zero casualty because the mayor and the councilors in the area were DRR engaged. They prepared food packs, they evacuated families in the vulnerable areas, by the coastal areas, and they did not have any support from the national government, but it was a community-driven, local, community-based climate action that they did, and there was zero casualty. There are many more examples of those local communities who don't need much resources, but just have to have a change of mindset. So if a municipality in the Visayas can do that, I am certain that other areas of our country can replicate this feat as well. And so I say it because we keep on having the same number of deaths, the same number of casualties, and so much to rehabilitate after a natural hazard strikes. As I said in my last sentence, these natural hazards don't have to turn into disasters if we are prepared.
Thank you to the good senator. And in closing, Mr. President, I'd just like to put on record two more questions that perhaps the Committee on Finance can treat of more as we consider the budgets of the Department of Health, DNR, and the whole proposed General Appropriations Act. The first of these questions, Mr. President, is, as the chair of the Committee on Finance, could the good senator give any interventions to help the Department of Health to ensure that our hospitals are resilient, that infrastructure will be preserved even in times of calamity? And lastly, Mr. President, how can women be further involved in DRRM planning and implementation?
Oh, those are
Thank
very
you to
good
the
questions
senator.
because, in fact, first on your question on hospitals, I believe it was 3 years ago. I can give you a copy of my privileged speech. There was a Safe Hospital campaign of the UNISDR, and the Safe Hospital campaign should have been integrated into how the DOH would manage its hospitals, but perhaps it would be good and instructional to actually have this as a special provision in the DOH budget in reference to their preparedness insofar as the DOH hospitals is concerned. Now, second, gender and climate change, or gender and DRR. This is every inch a gender issue. As I said, it is the women who bear the brunt of disasters because we are considered a vulnerable population. It is the women who have difficulty in trying to cope in the aftermath of a disaster. And so preparing women, again, this can be an activity perhaps of the Philippine Commission on Women, the National Commission on Women. There could be a special provision for that. We can also request the ILG through the local government academy to prepare a curriculum for preparedness, for DRR, especially for perhaps women LGU leaders or even women community leaders, to prepare a curriculum so that they can be DRR aware.
Thank you, good senator.
I thank you for
Mr.
your very
President.
enlightened interventions and would appreciate special provisions that you may request or that you may introduce as we do the General Appropriations Act? Thank you.
Mr. President, may I move to recognize Senator Mig Subiri for a manifestation without asking Senator Legarda to give up the floor because there will be an interpellation thereafter from Senator De Lima. So Senator
Okay,
Subiri.
Senator Subiri is recognized
Thank
to give his manifestation.
Thank you. I have no further questions. I have no questions, rather, to ask the good senator from Antique and the Republic of the Philippines. I would just like to associate myself with her speech, together with Senator Alan Cayetano, who mentioned earlier, to mention him as a supporter of her message and advocacy, together with Senator Joel Villanueva, who also went up to me and said that he supports the climate change advocacies of Senator Lauren Legarda. It's obvious that Senator Lauren Legarda is our climate change advocate. She is our Miss Climate Change. And Senator Gordon is our Mr. Disaster, being the chairperson of the Philippine Red Cross. So they go hand in hand. But levity aside, Mr. President, I'm glad that we have someone like her in this chamber that tirelessly fights for her climate change advocacies and climate change mitigation. And I'm not saying that because she's also the chairperson of the Committee on Finance. Thank you, Mr. President.
I appreciate the kind comments of the senator from Bukidnon.
Thank you, Senator Subiri.
And I don't want to go head on with Mr. Senator Disaster.
Don't worry, Mr.
What's the
President.
pleasure of Senator
I'm
Gordon?
not going to create a disaster, Mr. President, but the remarks of the gentleman from Bukidnon are really in aid of budget insertion. In other words, nagsisip-sip siya doon sa chairman ng Committee on Finance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President.
Thank you for that manifestation, Senator Gordon. Majority
President,
Leader,
may we recognize Senator De Lima.
Senator De Lima is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Will the good senator, the noted and renowned pro-environment champion of the Senate and of the country,
It would
yield
be
to
my
just one
honor,
question?
Mr. President, my pleasure, to answer the interpellations, the questions of the good senator from Bicol and the Philippines.
It's actually just one question. May we know the position of the good senator on the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, or the otherwise known as the Paris Climate Pact?
Yes.
We all know the backdrop of this agreement.
Of course.
And we know the status of
Yes.
this agreement.
I'm glad that the good senator had brought it to our attention, Mr. President. In fact, I was in New York as co-head of delegation on April 22. I've been advocating this for decades, since I was a young journalist, Mr. President. The status of the Paris Agreement is, it is with the executive. It is supposed to be transmitted to the Committee on Foreign Relations, chaired by Senator Cayetano. I'd spoken to Senator Alan about it, and as soon as it is transmitted to the chamber, he is willing and will sponsor the Paris Agreement. I know that there are several certificates of concurrence that are being awaited by the Climate Change Commission. The DFA is also very supportive of this, as clarified by Secretary Yasay during our budget hearing. And tomorrow we have the budget of the Climate Change Commission, if the good senator wishes to join this representation, so that we can have a briefing on the status of the agreement. We know that by November 4, this will come into effect, because this agreement says that if 55% of nations
Would ratify.
ratify it, then it would be into force. And so, while we are awaiting the ratification of the Philippine Senate, because it has not yet been transmitted to us, it will be enforced already. Let me just state, Mr. President, that our submissions of the intended nationally determined commitments are conditioned or pegged on technical and financial assistance, meaning the 70% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that we had introduced as an INDC is conditioned on technical and financial assistance, meaning that those who will say, why is the Philippines supposed to mitigate when we are only a 0.3% emitter in the world? Itatagalog ko po para simple. Tayo ay isang mahirap na bansa, tayo ay hindi naman sanhi ng nangyayaring pagbabago ng klima dahil tayo naman ay hindi nagsimula nito. Ang Estados Unidos, ang bansang Sina, ang India, ang European Union, sila, pagsasama-samahin natin ang kanilang greenhouse gas emissions, ang sanhi ng pagbabago ng klima. Ngayon, bakit tayo magmimitigate? Ang ibig sabihin po ng mitigate, bakit natin kailangan bawasan ang ating pagbubuga ng greenhouse gas emissions kung tayo ay isang mahirap na bansa? Will this stymie economic development? The answer, Mr. President, is that no, this will not stymie our economic development. As I said, being a 0.3% emitter in the world only means that even if we are a non-emitter in the world, it would be to our advantage because we can access the Green Climate Fund where billions of dollars await vulnerable nations like the Philippines.
We thank the good senator for enlightening us on the benefits, on the wisdom of the Paris Climate Pact, that indeed we are a signatory and it would be very good if we ratify this agreement. So
May I also-
my question really
Yes.
is the good
Yes.
senator supporting the ratification
Of
of that
Yes,
agreement?
Mr. President, I am not only supporting the agreement, I have also committed to the former UNFCCC head Secretary General Christiana Figueras, who may have lost in her bid for the United Nations Secretary General because the Portuguese, Mr. Gutierrez won as Secretary General, but Christiana is a good friend. She was a UNFCCC head, and I had committed that I will help her in her campaign for Mission 2020, Mission 2020, which is to compel nations, especially those emitting greenhouse gas emissions, the industrialized nations, to abide by the Paris Agreement. As I said, on November 4, it will be in effect. In fact, 75 countries, including the European Union, have already ratified the agreement. It is historic that both the United States and China have ratified the agreement, and I think more than 55%. We already have about 63% of total emissions if you put together all the countries that have ratified the agreement.
Thank you. That's all I wanted, a commitment from the good senator that is going to really push for the ratification of this agreement, as
Yes,
I
Mr.
will.
President.
I would want to be with you in that, the hearing, the committee hearing
Yes.
tomorrow, but unfortunately, there is a hearing on the Committee on Justice. So, but I'll be glad to go over all the other, the
Yes.
documents.
I really thank you for your questions because it is important that everyone understands that even if we are not a major emitter in the world,
Correct.
we, the agreement is not all about mitigation. It is about mitigation and adaptation. And adaptation means giving us the technical and financial assistance to do flood controls, to do early warning systems, to help our vulnerable populations, including our indigenous people, 15 million of them, of the 100 million population, to help the most rural areas who don't have electricity. There's so much that we could do with the funds that will come from the Green Climate Fund. In fact, small island states, Fiji, did Maldives ratify it? Grenadines, Palau, so many island states who are also non-emitters in the world have ratified it earlier than the Philippines. But of course, the ratification process may be simpler Maybe it's a matter of signature of their minister, but here in the Philippines, the timing was not very good because the previous administration did not finish the process of ratification because it was a campaign season, and it was inked on April 22. There was only session for a few days. We could not tackle it,
No
and there
time.
was no transmission done to the Senate.
Thank you. Indeed, there's so much to benefit
Yes,
from that agreement if we so ratify.
And nothing
Thank you
to
so much.
lose.
Thank you, Mr. President.
thank you.
Thank you, Senator De Lima. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to refer the speech of Senator Legarda to the Committee on Climate Change.
There's a motion to refer the privilege speech as well as the interpellation thereon, the privilege speech of Senator Legarda, to the Committee on Climate Change. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the guests of Senator Pacquiao, Mr. President, Vice Governor Dr. Elmer De Peralta, and 14 board members of Sarangani, Mr. President.
Welcome to our public officials from Sarangani.
Mr. President, to speak on a matter of public interest, may we recognize Senator Win Gatchalian.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, Senator Gatchalian is recognized to speak on a matter of public interest.
Magandang hapon po, Mr. President. Good afternoon to everyone. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I rise on a matter of personal and collective privilege to update this esteemed body on contemporary issues facing the Philippine energy sector. In July and August, the country's precarious energy situation caught the attention of the general public as persistent red and yellow alerts caused Luzon-wide rotating brownouts. Because of this, one of my first acts as chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy was to act on Senate Resolution number 74, filed by our distinguished colleague, Senate Minority Leader Ralph Recto, by conducting an investigation into these power interruptions, which were estimated to cost as much as 3.3 billion pesos in economic losses per hour. It became apparent during the investigation, Mr. President, that to serve the needs of our growing economy, it would be imperative to build an adequate power supply. Thus, it became one of my priorities as chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy to collaborate with public and private stakeholders of the energy sector in laying down the blueprint for establishing the right energy mix for the Philippines. Simply put, my vision is to build an energy supply founded upon the principle of 3S, a stable energy supply which provides sulit or affordable energy to consumers while ensuring environmental sustainability. In furtherance of this vision, Mr. President, the Senate Energy Committee has undertaken extensive consultative hearings with industry stakeholders to identify prevailing issues and craft solutions to the problems facing our energy sector. We started off these consultations by inviting the Department of Energy family to brief us on its mandates and plans of action. Certainly, as the foremost government agency directing Philippine energy policy, the DOE will play a critical role in deciding our country's energy future. However, the DOE cannot do it alone. As legislators, we must take our oversight function seriously to make sure that the DOE and its attached agencies are performing their duties with the highest levels of competence and responsiveness. Additionally, the Senate must be ready to quickly pass legislation to clear roadblocks in existing laws which continue to hinder progress in the energy sector. Mr. President, the next series of hearings involve the stakeholders of the upstream and downstream oil and gas industries. There, we discuss issues such as the nearing expiration of the Malampaya service contract and the pending depletion of the Malampaya gas field, one of Luzon's primary power sources, as well as the potential of establishing a liquefied natural gas infrastructure to best serve our energy needs. In the coming months, we will need to further discuss the prospects of our oil and gas industries in relation to the exploration of the West Philippine Sea, where abundant energy resources sit untapped beneath contested waters. Indeed, it could be said that the midterm prospects of reducing our dependence on foreign energy sources will be decided by how the current administration handles the continuing dispute in the West Philippine Sea. Personally, I hope that this administration's emerging independent foreign policy agenda will also serve as a catalyst for achieving Philippine energy independence by vigorously upholding and defending our exclusive sovereign rights to explore and develop resources in the West Philippine Sea. Our next task, Mr. President, was to discuss challenges facing the renewable energy subsector, to discuss challenges concerning the feed-in tariff, net metering policy, and other issues related to the implementation of the Renewable Energy Law. Truly, the sustainability of our energy supply is closely tied with the development of expanded clean energy projects which will help the Philippines reduce its carbon footprint as we strive to fulfill our commitment to preserve the environment. In this context, we must renew our efforts to fully implement the Renewable Energy Law. Lastly, but certainly not the least, Mr. President, we invited stakeholders to discuss the state of our power sector. From this discussion, it became clear that our electricity supply is nowhere near as stable as it needs to be. This instability, if allowed to continue, will dampen the Philippine economy's robust growth outlook. Apparently, one of the causes of continuing instability is our woefully inadequate transmission grid, which keeps excess power trapped away from it is needed. There is a great need to formulate and implement a new transmission development plan, which will close the loop once and for all through an integrated national power grid connecting Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Mr. President, after spending all of those hours talking to energy sector stakeholders, it is clear that we have a long way to go towards realizing our vision of a stable, sustainable, and affordable energy supply in this country. Rather than be discouraged, however, I believe that we should rise to the challenge. Through coordinated action, the Senate can help achieve change in the energy sector. For example, allow me to highlight one issue ripe for legislative resolution: the thick layers of red tape surrounding the construction of badly needed power generation projects. Given the intensive capital cost and technological issues of undertaking energy projects, they take years to complete. Therefore, the key to building a stable energy supply is to make sure that commercial plants come online following a strict schedule based on properly forecasted demand. However, Mr. President, the ridiculous bureaucratic struggle that interested developers must go through in registration, pre-development, conversion, and development stages is a strong disincentive for investors, especially foreign investors with significant amounts of capital to enter the field. Certainly, uncertainty about receiving permits on time or about being approved at all is a formidable barrier to entry for firms. To show just how thick the red tape is, Mr. President, let's take runoff river hydro plants as an example. Look at the slides here provided by PhilHydro Association, showing the permitting process flowchart. The regulatory process one must go through in order to get a hydro plant off the ground and running is literally a labyrinth of forms and signatures. According to this data, it takes a company interested building in run-of-river hydro plant 1,340 days to obtain all of the permits necessary before starting construction. That's more than 3.5 years. During that time, the proponent of the plant will have to secure at least 359 signatures from 74 regulatory agencies and attached bureaus. They will also have to make sense of 20 laws governing the entire process as they attempt to accomplish 34 different contracts, certifications, endorsements, and licenses. Talk about regulatory overkill. This bureaucratic nightmare is, unfortunately, not limited to hydro plants. In every hearing we held, complaints of red tape and government inefficiency were a universal chorus among stakeholders. Simply put, red tape is tying down the energy sector, and with it, prospects for stronger economic growth. Mr. President, ever since my days as a local public servant in Valenzuela City, I've been a proponent of instituting ease of doing business reforms to unleash the productive capacity of private enterprise. The same kind of reforms will have to be beneficial to the energy generation sector since EPIRA has created a privatized energy paradigm. Therefore, it must be one of our legislative priorities to streamline the energy sector, the entire energy regulatory framework, starting with permits and licensing processes. In line with this, Mr. President, I'm preparing to file a bill which will declare certain power infrastructure projects as projects of national significance. Urgently needed power infrastructure projects designated as projects of national significance will be the subject of procedural incentives which will streamline licensing processes. Through this proposal, we hope to significantly cut the amount of red tape wrapped around desperately needed power infrastructure projects, thereby reducing the interval between the earliest stages of conceptualization and fully operational status by years at a time. This will, in turn, boost investor confidence in power projects by fostering certainty and stability in the timetables of these complex projects. In this way, we can face any impending energy crisis head-on with swift and concerted action. In addition to this proposal, I will also steer the Senate Energy Committee to work double time in collaboration with the DOE and private energy stakeholders to lay the groundwork for an express one-stop shop which will fix the bureaucratic mess surrounding energy projects once and for all. Instead of having to run through the hectic labyrinth of departments, agencies, and other government offices, persons interested in undertaking power infrastructure projects will be able to complete all of their regulatory requirements in a single place. In doing this, we will be taking a crucial step forward in building a sustainable energy supply for the Philippines by encouraging sustainable development and growth in our energy sector through coordinated and responsive regulatory mechanisms. Mr. President, in closing, let me drive home a point which has become more and more clear to me the more I have immersed myself in energy policy. The fate of our economy is closely intertwined with the quality of our energy supply. For all of the macroeconomic strides we have made in the past few years, it is nevertheless a sobering reality that we still have a long way to go in fostering truly inclusive growth which will uplift the lives of even the most unprivileged Filipinos. We can only achieve this type of sustained growth by building a stronger economic machine powered both literally and figuratively, by a stable, sustainable, and solid energy supply. Otherwise, our long-term economic prospects will grow dark, and we must never let that happen. Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian.
Mr. President.
What's the pleasure of Senator Legarda? Yes, what's the pleasure of Senator Legarda?
May I be recognized, Mr. President? Yes. I wanted to associate myself with the good senator from Valenzuela and the Philippines in his neophyte, the neophyte senator has delivered his maiden privilege speech on something very important. And I would like to ask him whether this would entail legislation or is it simply influencing the Department of Energy to facilitate the procedures instead of 800 signatures or 500 signatures for a hydro project or any energy project for that one-stop shop, similar to what the DOLE had done under Secretary Bello. Because that is the complaint that I've heard from time immemorial, without casting aspersion on any administration or any secretary. And yan po ang sakit, hindi lang ng DOE, kundi ng iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno. You're a businessman, you come from a business family, and you know what ails Philippine business. So I much appreciate what you'd presented here, and I hope that you could actually do that one-stop shop, which I think would not entail legislation.
I think, Madam Senator, we will need legislation because from our research, because it will crisscross different departments as well as some local governments. We will need an overarching legislation to really compel all of these departments to support this one-stop shop, because it's they will be coming from different departments, and I think these different departments will also have various prerequisites and various laws that pertains to power plants and other energy-related projects.
And in the meantime, does it mean that developers, investors, the business community would have to go through the whole rigorous process of more than 500 signatures?
I think
That's very anti-business.
it's really anti-business, Madam Senator, because the hands of DOE is tied, and they can only do so much in terms of speeding up the process, because what they can actually improve is just within the realm of Department of Energy. But they are also having trouble convincing and also mobilizing the other departments, especially the local governments, which I think you have to crisscross 3 different levels: the barangays,
Municipality
the
or city,
municipalities, and
and
the
the
provinces.
Yes.
In fact, I've heard horror stories that even the barangays themselves, can really delay a major power plant or a major infrastructure project.
You're correct. I will no longer interpolate. I simply wanted to associate myself with your good intention, and I would support the legislation that you are presenting. But perhaps an executive order of the President, because I've heard him say many times, pag national permits, 25 days. Pag LGU, 3 days. When the President says something, he means it and he wants it done.
I think this is...
Since you are close to the President, you're traveling with him to China, I think that an executive order would be able, if he put it in place, will change the whole scenario in the meantime that your proposed legislation is not yet enacted.
Definitely, Madam Senator, that a direction from the executive department, especially from the economic cluster, can really improve the time frame and the approval of this process. It's really ridiculous for a simple runoff river power plant. And in fact, just to give you a broad overview, the potential for runoff river or hydro plants in our country is about 10,000 megawatts. If we can just access the 10,000 megawatts, we would not need coal plants or any other plants
Exactly.
to
Yes.
power our economy. But actually this morning I met also with the ambassador of the UK, and I think the UK had one bad experience in Palawan. It took them almost 23 years from the start to the end to operate a single runoff river hydro plant. So it's really a disincentive for serious investors in the power sector.
If you're able to do that, and I'm sure you will, at the soonest possible time, that will be a great legacy that you, a very young senator, would be able to do. So I thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you, Madam Senator. Thank you po.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Senator Subiri was raising his hand
yes,
earlier.
but may I be allowed, Mr. President,
Majority
to
Leader.
move to suspend interpellation of the topic of the privilege speech of Senator Gatchalian, because there are 3 or 4 other senators who wish to interpellate.
Okay.
But I was reminded by Senator Legarda, Chairman of the Committee on Finance, on the scheduled caucus, and some of the members might be leaving shortly. So if the gentleman from Valenzuela will not mind, I move to suspend interpellation until Monday, for the topic.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Privilege speech.
Tuesday. Oh yes, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
All right. So,
So there's a
may
motion?
may I push for the motion first, Mr. President? Move to suspend.
There is a
interpellations
motion to
until
suspend the
Tuesday.
interpellation on the privileged speech of Senator Gatchalian regarding our energy sector to be resumed on Tuesday. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Subiri, it is a pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, yes, I also manifested to want to interpolate, but not interpolate, but point of information. But I'll wait till Monday when we can continue the topic of the energy sector and the red tape that you have gone through, because the Committee on Trade and Industry is also tackling the issue on red tape. But, Mr. President, my manifestation today is somewhat an issue that is not just a matter of personal privilege, but it's also in the defense of the Senate. As you know, Mr. President, we celebrated our centennial anniversary last week. And during that week, I realized that we faced one of the worst attacks against our independence, wherein a commission created by the Constitution itself had threatened to undermine our independence as an institution. Last October 4, Commission on Human Rights Commissioner Roberto Eugenio Cadiz publicly slammed the committee chair of the Justice Committee, Senator Richard Gordon, for suspending the hearings on the extrajudicial killings issue after a heated debate with our honorable colleague, Senator Laila De Lima. And quoting from a news article, Mr. President, the commissioner had said, "Who's running away from the Senate hearing? De Lima, Matobato, or Gordon, and the other senators of the majority? Who's closing this hearing? Under the circumstances, there is every reason to believe it is Gordon who's afraid of this hearing. I challenge him as a commissioner. The only way for him to recover his credibility as chairman is to continue with the hearings and listen to the other witnesses. Otherwise, there is every reason to believe he is a coward." Mr. President, that is a bit too much and unfair, Mr. President. This kind of cavalier attitude and scathing statement against our very own committee chair, Senator Richard Gordon, and other members of the committee, including myself, who's a member of the majority bloc of the committee, is an insult to the Senate and its history. I cannot let this pass, Mr. President. The Commission on Human Rights, as a constitutional body, should respect the Senate as an institution, as well as its processes and time-honored traditions. The Commissioner's statements are truly, truly unfair, Mr. President. And the committee even devoted, unfair because the committee even devoted several hearings on Matobato's testimony. And despite these accommodations, the credibility of the chairman himself is now being challenged. So, Mr. President, I personally believe that when one of the commissioners of the Commission on Human Rights says that credibility is lost when a chairperson of the Senate committee and its members react to certain turn of events in a hearing, we can say that this is an interference of our exclusive realm and a clear breach of our jurisdiction. As such, as a member of the Senate Committee on Human Rights and the Senate of the Philippines, I would like to hear an explanation, or at least, at the very least, demand an apology from the Commission of Human Rights for the statements made by them in October 4, 2016. And I leave it to the chairperson or the chairman, because there's supposed to be a hearing tomorrow. I would like to see, as a member of that committee, that they either apologize or explain before we have their hearing tomorrow. What I was told by the chairperson and both co-chairs, Chairman Gordon and Chairman Lacson, is that they will await the explanation of the the Commission on Human Rights. But meantime, they will continue with the hearing tomorrow on the issue of death penalty, since it will be the same resource persons, if I was told. So that was my manifestation, Mr. President. It's not a privileged speech of sorts. It's just that I was appalled. No? The same way the other house would, or other agencies would insult a fellow colleague, like Senator De Lima, we would also stand up and defend a fellow colleague. In this case, I'm here to stand in defense of our chair of the committee, at the same time, my chair in the Red Cross. And I believe that his credibility is unquestionable, Mr. President, and he means well for the committee and for the Senate. So with that, I submit, Mr. President.
Thank you for that manifestation, Senator Subiri. Senator Gordon, you want to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to rise here and reply to my colleague from Bukidnon. And I thank him for thinking of the institution of the Senate. When we conduct investigations here, especially this representation, I think you're all witness to the fact that we tried as much as possible to be fair, firm, and certainly in command of the situation. Sometimes it's unavoidable that there will be altercations, but we do not lose our dignity for that, Mr. President. However, when somebody whom I don't even know stands up and starts casting aspersions on the Senate, you know, Mr. President, I can forgive people who attack me, but this is an institution. It's an institution that deserves the respect of everyone, and I think all of us here have tried to live by the code. We have not gone beyond the pale. And so therefore, I think every, assault on the Senate must be, answered and addressed. Now, Mr. President, you never heard me complain about this. In fact, I was approached even by your own sister, who is a member of the commission, and I raised the matter very gently to her, and I said, I think one of your people has become a rogue, an interloper, a pretender who makes statements that he doesn't even know of, and that he is destroying the institution called the Commission on Human Rights. Now, you know, Mr. President, that this representation, even in my past life as a senator, have always gone up and supported the Commission on Human Rights. And I think the very maxim res ipsa loquitur will bear me out as we investigate these so-called extrajudicial killings. Already, I'm pretty sure I can look at myself in the mirror at any time of the day or at any time of the evening and say that the committee has really acquitted itself. Senator Lacson, Senator Subiri, Senator Pacquiao, all the others, Senator Angara, we ask very, very good questions, including all the others. I just want to point out, Mr. President, it is unfair for anybody who is not even known to us to suddenly come out of the woodwork, call a press conference, and dare to say that we are cowards. I'm a coward. Mr. President, I don't have to prove my manhood to anybody. Maybe some people are insecure about their manhood, but I don't have to prove my manhood to anybody, Mr. President. I just try to prove my manhood by being a gentleman at all times. I have done that here in the Senate, not only in this
current session, current Congress, but in the previous Congress. Because ano ba mawawala sa atin kung mag-apologize? Ano ba mawawala sa atin kung we give way? But we do not attack each other here. We do not savage each other here. The President is aware of the fact that I was going to go on a privileged speech on that incident, again, to protect the institution. And when the people concerned came to me and I didn't even announce it to the press, I kept quiet. The majority of our leader is aware of this. I did not go on with that because these are colleagues of ours. I don't want to embarrass anybody here. It doesn't add to my intelligence or my pride that I would insult a fellow member of the Senate. No, far be it from my mind to do that. Especially, you know, the way we've all been raised up. We are raised to go to the higher level, not to the lower level. And so when the chairman of the Committee on Human Rights called me the previous evenings and say, and I quote, "Good evening po, Senator Gordon." And he's a friend of mine. He's from UP. I've always encouraged him. And he says, "I am currently in Amsterdam and heard about the news report that one of our commissioners criticized you. This is not the position of the commission. And back, and I apologize for whatever aggravation this may have caused you and the honorable members of the Senate Justice and Human Rights Committee. I've spoken to the other commissioners and we hope to make it right. May I please call you? Thanks and God bless. Chito Gascon." I took the call, Your Honor. Late at night, because I sleep late. No shirt on my back, no skin on my nose. And I just want to say that, and I accepted that call. I did so as a friend, knowing that he's sincere. And I still think he is. Unfortunately, when the so-called apology came out, it was kind of limp and kind of condescending. You know, and I told some members of the Commission on Human Rights yesterday, huwag naman ganyan. Kung mag-apologize, sabihin niya direkta, wala naman mawawala eh. Senado yung ininsulto niya eh. Ako, kaya kong patawarin yan. Pero pag Senado, kalaban niyo ako. Kalaban niyo ang Senado. And lugar na may mga kaibigan kayo sa Senado, baka mawalan na kayo ng kaibigan altogether. Wala naman mawawala sa inyo. Hindi naman namin kayo na-atake. We're happy that there's a Commission on Human Rights. We're happy that they can come around and help us investigate the wrongs that are being perpetrated. And Mr. President, I was all out and saying, let them come. In fact, Mr. President, humihingi pa nga ng pamasahe. Lahat sila, 50 members of their witnesses and their, humihingi sila ng pamasahe. And I would have to look for the money so that they can come here. Pero I told some members of the Commission on Human Rights, you have to come across. You have to tell this member that he was out of line, that he was not only unauthorized, and it cannot be the chairman apologizing for him because he has not even apologized by himself. It's no big deal for me, Mr. President. No big deal for me as a person. It's a big deal for me when the Senate as an institution is attacked. And you heard Mr. Gascon talk about the members of the Senate itself. He knows what he's talking about. And that is a cavalier not a cavalier statement in the wrong sense of the word. That is a statement of a gentleman. But let that commissioner skunk out of his responsibility. He should not skunk out like a skunk. Your Honor, he doesn't deserve the dignity of being named here in this commission. So, Mr. President, tomorrow, I am not going to call the Commission on Human Rights until an apology is made to the Senate. I will intend to continue with the hearings. Mr. President, since I took over reluctantly, and I even asked that some members who were in the middle of the affray be members of the committee, and I don't have to pat myself on the back. I wanted fairness. And all throughout, we did that. And I'm glad that I don't even mention who came to me because we're all friends. I commiserate with all our friends here when they're under attack. But, Mr. President, I cannot commiserate in this particular action. This guy is not even man enough to come to you. Mr. President, huwag na sa akin, kayo. Yung Senate President, it's not our intention to attack the institution of the Senate. It's not our intention to demean the Commission on Human Rights. Human rights, you have the duty to respect one another. Ano human rights are you talking about? Ang human rights na kabig, hindi ang duty. You have to fulfill your duty as well. Your duty to your fellow man to be respectful. Not because we are higher or not because we have a title, but because we are human beings entitled to respect and the dignity that we have earned. I don't even know this man. I'm not being emotional here. I don't need to. But I do know that when he says, for example, let me just say, so that Botabato started afraid to confront the other witnesses. We're cowards. My gosh, we gave Botabato all the leeway. And tomorrow I intend to show the lies perpetrated by this man. Because he came in, and we intend to show that. I also intend to show the people of this country that the police of this country have a responsibility to explain why they cannot solve killings. I'm not going to run away from that responsibility. Pag may namamatay, magpaliwanag dapat ang responsible. And that is important. And that is why we took great pains, Mr. President, to even write down every killing in every province. I even took pains to put the name of the commander of the police so that he can be put there and say, "Oy, ang dami na namamatay sa'yo, anong ginagawa mo? General De La Rosa, what are you going to do with this man?" Pwedeng ganyan. We're doing our job, and this guy just comes out of the woodwork. You don't even know him from Adam. He wants his few minutes of pain, steps on the back of people who work hard, and we don't even know him. My God, Mr. President, I'm not going to call the Commission on Human Rights until they acquit themselves. Because if they cannot acquit themselves of this responsibility, I am not going to support them. I will continue supporting the human rights as a philosophy of this individual who was raised by his parents to respect others. Even the bar girls in Olongapo, even the lowly, even the criminals deserve respect. They deserve due process, Mr. President. That is our belief. And I've been in the Red Cross for 48 years. I don't want to use the Red Cross for anything else. But res ipsa loquitur. All of us have to speak for ourselves in the manner that we do. I was looking at the debate the other day with Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton, and I was amused. My God, these two people were demeaning themselves before the whole world, accusing themselves of all kinds of things. They were never focused on the issues. They were focused on their personal attacks from each other. My gosh, sabi pa ni Mr. Trump, those are words. That's locker room banter. And then he goes back and says, but her husband, he did act on certain things that he should be responsible for. The same thing here. We are all responsible for what we say and what we do. And therefore, Mr. President, forgive me if I will not call that, and I would like to manifest here that para hindi naman masayang, although I'm against the death penalty, and since it is also connected here, I will hear, andun naman same witnesses naman yan, NBI, pinatawag ko po, para kung hindi kayang ibistigay ng internal affairs yung mga pulis, mapaimbestiga ko sa NBI. Pinatawag ko po yung mga pulis. Iharap ko, tama ba itong death penalty sa mga drugs? Because baka naman ang nangyayari dito, tayo, wala tayong death penalty sa drugs, kaya tayo ginagawang hub. Malimit sinasabi ni Senator Soto yan na malimit na ginagawa dito dahil hindi natatakot dahil wala tayong death penalty. I am against the death penalty. Foursquare, you heard the debate between me and Senator Pacquiao. But I am willing to consider and listen. And I want the Senate to make that decision for themselves, each and every one of us. And I think that has become more important than discussing the complaint of the human rights individual who seems to have the franchise on what is right and what is just. I don't know who gave him that right. But we must stand up and, and really condemn this individual. Not because we're bigger, not because we're more powerful, but because the Senate has earned the respect. We just celebrated 100 years. I was very proud of the fact that we saw our forebears in the Senate, the Rectos, the Cuencos, Sotos, the Dioknos. And I said, I'm glad to be in the Senate. I mean, I didn't join the Senate just to be, a power base or to take a position here, to take a title. I came here and I look back at that, and I hope the people who will succeed us here in the Senate will act in that fashion, that we are trailblazing here, that we are capable of conducting an investigation in an objective manner, not being controlled by powers that be, even if people try to let them know that, say that that is their perception. Well, I am not afraid. I've never been afraid. I've stood up against other people, and I don't have to do, it was difficult. I know how one of our senators feel right now, and I commiserate with her. But I have never been unfair, Mr. President. I will not be unfair, because that demeans us. We are here to enable and ennoble our people, and enable and ennoble our colleagues and each other. And if we cannot do that, then sana na natin na Senado. Kung tayo babatuhin na lamang ng mga tao hindi natin kilala, na may responsibility dapat, excuse me. So, Mr. President, you will forgive me. I will not call the hearing tomorrow on the matter of extrajudicial killing. I am ready to make a report, quite frankly. Ginagawa ko na po yung report. Pero hinihintay ko na lang yung ibang mga gamit. And I think you can fault me for it, but I know I'm going to make people accountable. And I'm going to ask everybody, it's not my report, they will have to sign. Each of one will have to sign that report, and people don't like it, then they won't have to sign it. But the point is, Mr. President, we all take responsibility for our actions. The CHR, the leader, must always take responsibility for the people that he leads. Tito Gascon has done that, but the CHR has not done their duty as well. So, Mr. President, thank you very much for the time. Hindi ko po kailangan magpa-importante dyan sa tao yan. Sabi ko nga doon sa ating mga kaibigan dito, pagdasal na lang natin yan. They know not what they do. Siguro nakatungtong sa kalabaw, mas malaki pa sa kalabaw. And that is a problem sometimes with our country. We have people who are appointed who seek title and who seek position, but cannot do what is right. And no wonder, hindi sila pinapansin. Kung they cannot respect others, how do they expect that they will be respected by others, Mr. President? And you know, if we do not stand up here, and I would like to thank Senator Zubiri, of course, Senator Zubiri and I go back a lot of ways. Not because we're friends, even if his father is from the other school, and they lost the championship and to the Ateneo Blue Eagles at that time when he was playing for LaSalle. I forgive him. It's part of human rights and duties. But I cannot blame Senator Zubiri for being close, and we are close, and I'm proud to be associated with Senator Zubiri, and I'm proud to be associated with the Senate. God bless the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Gordon.
Sir President,
Senator
may I
Cayetano.
just manifest some quick observations?
Go
No? First of all, Senator Dick, we thank you for standing up for the Senate and for the committee, as you said, not for yourself. I looked at the apology. First of all, at least on the face of the apology, it seems that it is a press statement made after they realized that there was a mistake. But it seems from this apology, they made no effort to correct the report that it is the CHR that slammed the Senate. Because it's very important that as soon as you read it, and all agencies now monitor the media, Twitter, that you correct it. Because the longer it stays, the more people will believe it's true, and the international media is monitoring us. Second observation, Mr. President, the public and the media can criticize us all they want. When we did not immediately investigate the pork barrel scam, there was a lot of criticisms, and it was the right of the media and newspapers. But if the departments, agencies, constitutional bodies would be allowed to do this, then if Senator Grace does not call a hearing on emergency powers, the DOTC themselves are free to slam the Senate for not hearing it. If the, never mind if Senator Villanueva does not hear the ENDO and the laborers slam him for not hearing it, because that is their right. But if the Labor Department does that, then they will be running the Senate. We are not independent anymore. So that's the second observation. Third observation, Mr. President, on the fourth paragraph of their apology, ito po na nakalagay. The Commission hopes that the Senate will come up with fair and credible results cognizant of the latter's independence and competence. I'd like to clarify, what does that mean? Does that mean na kung hindi sila satisfied sa results, hindi na ito fair and credible? You know, when we write letters, when I write a letter to you, I say, I hope it will be favorably considered. Meaning, Mr. President, baka may hingin ako sa iyo or may i-request, baka hindi mo ibigay. Kaya I hope favorable. So when they say they hope it will be fair and credible, expect na natin. Kung hindi yung resulta na gusto na lumabas ay hindi yung resulta na gusto ng CHR, they will again slam the Senate. So why apologize in the first place? Lastly, Mr. President, the CHR is a constitutional body. It is up to them to investigate human rights violations. So I do not understand why they are making it appear to the public and to the international community that when we stop, tigil ang investigasyon sa human rights. They can investigate 24/7. It is their job to investigate, and it is their job to pass it to the prosecutorial services of our country and to do other remedies. Yung atin in aid of legislation, Mr. President. So I do want to prolong the discussions, but since it was taken up, I just wanted to put those observations on record. And again, thank Senator Dick. I know he did not want to stand up. I knew he didn't want to make this an issue. But it's an issue about the institution and the committee and not an issue about Senator Dick Gordon. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano.
Mr. President, I move to suspend the session so that the members of the Senate can go into caucus as requested by the chairman of the Committee on Finance. And that will give us a chance to look over the budget of the Commission on Human Rights, especially the commissioners,
That's correct.
Mr. President.
That's correct. There's
So
a
I move
motion.
to suspend.
There's a motion to suspend. Any objection? Hearing none, our session is suspended. Nasa office yun.
Benji, tama na yan, Benji.
May manifestation si, ano?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, may we recognize Senator Joel Villanueva for a manifestation?
Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is just a short manifestation of what had happened this morning in my hometown in the province of Bulacan. I would just like to manifest my sincerest sympathy to the victims of the explosion of the fireworks store in Bukawi, Bulacan this morning. Mr. President, this is a clear example of how our brothers and sisters are forced to take on dangerous work because of lack of safer and quality jobs in the country. And I hope that this August Chamber, together with this administration, this government, will be able to help out and be able to focus more on providing better economic opportunities so that jobs that put people's lives and safety at risk can be avoided. Mr. President, I'd also like to put on record that this representation would like to appeal and encourage this body to support legislative measures that will strengthen the regulation on the safety of workers. This representation would also like to manifest its full support to all initiatives that will give local governments the greater flexibility and authority to provide livelihood and better opportunities. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Villanueva.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Section 114 of Republic Act 8435, otherwise known as the Agricultural and Fisheries Modernization Act, I'd like to manifest the following members of the Senate to the Congressional Oversight Committee. For the majority, Senator Francis Pangilinan, Chair. Members Villar, Aquino, IV, Legarda, De Lima, and Poe. For the minority, Ralph Recto, Mr. President.
The manifestation of the Senate contingent to the Congressional Oversight Committee on Agricultural and Fisheries Modernization is noted.
Also, Mr. President, I move that Senator Cynthia Villar be made co-author of Senate Bill number 7, of which I am the principal author of, Mr. President, the SIM Card Registration Act.
Noted and approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. And likewise, Senator Dick Gordon, Mr. President.
The same Senate bill.
Senate Bill number
The
7.
manifestation is noted and approved.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, October 17, 2016.
Is there any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, October 17, 2016.